What's up, guys, and welcome back to MoAn Inc. If you guys are new here, then hello! My name is Erica, and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, we are going to be chatting about ancient Greek lyric poet Pindar. But before we can get into that, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now that you've so kindly done that, let's get into the video. Pindar! As I just said, he is a very famous ancient Greek lyric poet. Now, he may be the most famous lyric poet of all time, but again, we know that I am biased. Anyone who's in the ancient world, I'm always like, they're the most famous. They could or they couldn't be, but to me, Pindar is the most famous Greek lyric poet of literally all time. He is just gifted, as you will see from this video. Today's video, as you guys who are regulars will know, is just context about who Pindar is. I'm not going to be going into the details of the poems that do survive from him, the odes that survive from him. We'll do that in some subsequent videos later on. So if you did tune in the hopes of getting detailed breakdowns of what these surviving lyric poets are, poems, even, he is the lyric poet. That is not for today's video. So, speaking of Pindar, let's try to piece together what his life looked like that meant he could create such incredible work that survives to us today. Pindar was born in 518 BC or BCE in Boeotia in Greece, and he dies sometime around 448, 447-ish BC or BCE, but this time in Argos, right? So he moves during his lifetime. And during this period, so much stuff happens. I mean, very important Greek history happens during Pindar's life. So this is a really interesting time, not only that Pindar is alive during this period, but also just that all of these other things are going on at the same time that will ultimately impact his story, as we will see. Unsurprisingly, again, you guys who are regulars will know this, that very, very little is known about Pindar specifically, right? And so when it comes to reconstructing his life, it's a lot of what other people have said because Pindar isn't writing everything down. He does give us a little bit of detail, but more specifically when we're constructing somebody's life like this, we are doing it via a number of different sources. No one sat down. He didn't even sit down and write a diary of his life. And so we are sort of inferring and literally creating a puzzle of all of these random fragmentary mentions of someone like Pindar. But what we do get, which is really, really exciting, are his parents' names. This is out of the ordinary when it comes to ancient writers, especially somebody as early as Pindar. So I did obviously write down his parents' names because I wouldn't have remembered them. So the names are up on the screen, but his father is called Diophantus, I think is how you pronounce that, and Cleodike, which is super, super exciting. And more excitingly, we do know that Pindar is not from Thebes, though he is from Boeotia. He was actually born just outside of Thebes. Now, the names of his parents don't tell us this, right? The names of his parents actually don't tell us a lot about him and about like the family lineage, but we do know that they were wealthy people. Now, how do we know this? Well, for Pindar to get the training that he ends up getting, they have to be wealthy. That's how the ancient world works. You do not have a rags to riches story. You don't have somebody who literally is poverty born and ends up becoming one of the most important or influential artists in this time period. Unfortunately, that's just not how the world worked. So in order for Pindar to rise through the ranks of history to the point where, as we will see, Alexander the Great loves him so much he refuses to burn the guy's house down. Don't worry, we will get there. In order to get to such a stature, you couldn't do that with no money in the bank and just sheer talent. That's not how that world worked. But even though we know that his parents were really wealthy, we don't know if he went to Athens to go and study. We don't know any of that kind of stuff. We can infer because that's sort of what the elite would have done. They would have, gone to Athens, got their training there, come back home, expanded, done whatever it was that they had to do in order to rise in the ranks. But we don't actually have any of that written down or explicit. However, we do know that later on in his life, Pindar has a good relationship with the city of Athens. So is that because he studied there? Is it just because that later on he goes there and he ends up being super successful? So people were like, wow, this guy's a catch. It's unclear, as so much is in the ancient world. I'm smiling because I'm used to it, but I know that a lot of you guys are going to be sitting there like, again? Yes, again. Speaking of Athens, we do know that Pindar, one, his first competition at the Dionysia in 497 BC or BCE. Now, whether this win was technically a catalyst for the rest of his career or whether he was somewhat established by this point is, again, something that we don't know. But we do know that at the age of 20, yes, just 20 years old, he was already employed for his talents. Pindar was commissioned by a ruling family from Thessaly to write an ode that celebrated athletic victories of a young man by the name of Hippocleius. Now, this ode is called Pythian 10, right? So it's named after the Pythian Games, and this is something that we will see that Pindar becomes incredibly famous for writing these odes as celebration songs for victors in various games, not only in the Pythian Games, but also the Olympics, the ancient Olympics, obviously, the Pythian Games, the Nemean Games, and the Isthmian Games. And let me tell you, he is commissioned from all across Greece in his early career to write these incredible odes, right? So this is what we then get passed. We get passed down? Is that English? Those poems get passed down to us. Those odes get passed down to us. That makes better sense than what the hell I said before. Those are what come to us today. And they are commissioned from all across Greece, but also from Asia Minor, as well as even as far as Sicily. These odes are famous not because they only explicitly talk about the victories of the person that he was commissioned to write about, but also it tells a little bit about his relationship, like Pindar's relationship with the gods, with everyday life, religion, that kind of a thing. Those are woven in to these beautiful odes as well. Now, everything that I've spoken to you guys about up until this point has been prior to the Persian Wars. Okay, so this is obviously things are bubbling in the background, but this is the time where Pindar is coming up. He's like this guy from Boeotia that is really taking the ancient Greek world by storm. They are super impressed by him. He is winning countless awards. He is, like I said, getting employed by so many people to write these incredible victory songs and odes. And then, just like that, the Persian Wars hit. Now, why is this so fascinating when we look at Pindar? Reason being is because Pindar, like I keep saying, he's from Boeotia or Boeotia, whichever. Again, can a Greek person let me know? But either way, with Pindar being from there, when the Persians come in and when Darius makes his first, big move against Greece in 492 BC or BCE, this creates a divide, not only in Greece, but specifically with Thebes and with the rest of Greece. Now, if you guys don't know about this, I'm not going to get into too much detail about the Persian Wars right now. You guys can listen to my episode with Professor Paul Cartledge, where we talk about Thebes specifically and obviously touch on the issues that came about during the Persian Wars. But this is really fascinating because Thebes is the only ancient Greek polis that stand with Persia. Right, and there are a number of different reasons for this. Again, watch my interview with Professor Paul Cartledge to start unpacking all of those. But given that Pindar is from this area, he is unbelievably loyal to Thebes. He really is loyal and he bounds himself to Thebes during this time. And this, understandably, sours his reputation because the rest of Greece, although at this time Greece is made up of a bunch of different individual polises, so Sparta was a polis and Athens was a separate polis, there wasn't this united idea of Greece. This is where they all start uniting to kind of get rid of the Persians that are attacking. Meanwhile, you have Thebes that have decided, we are not going to win this, we should just side with the Persians. So when we have somebody like Pindar, who's on top of his game in Athens, across this ancient Greek world, suddenly kind of be like, well, I'm a Theban through and through, like these are my people, I'm loyal to them. Everybody else is not wild, understandably, about this. However, Pindar makes it through this period, and actually, he does manage to make a career comeback despite this mishap, shall we call it. What he does really interestingly is that he already has a really good relationship with a lot of different people across Greece, which was unfortunately he ends up siding with the pro-Persian side of this war. However, he really relies on his relationships with those in Sicily that ultimately end up rebuilding his career and his career reputation. This is because he actually goes to Sicily in around 476 to like 474 BC or BCE, if I'm remembering those dates correctly. He goes for a few years basically to Sicily and ends up having a really good relationship with these two tyrants. One tyrant is Pharaon of Acragas. If you guys watched my first Punic War episode, we have mentioned Acragas in that video. In case you guys need like a sort of connecting it everywhere, there is a tyrant at this time of Acragas who Pindar has a good relationship with, and the other one is a tyrant of Syracuse whose name is Hieron. It's really with the help of these two that he ends up rebuilding his name, but even though he does rebuild, there are a number of backlashes, but that is, I am really struggling with English and I don't speak another language. This is really like just not good. He was often accused, is probably the best way of putting this, by contemporaries of his time or people a little bit later on, of being a bit of a sellout during this period. Like apparently he would just do work for the highest bidder, and then that would sort of rebuild his relationship that he was just going towards like the richest people. Now, again, look, this is rumor, this is neither here nor there, but also if you are coming back from a bad reputation hit, like the one that Pindar was currently facing, is it the worst thing to align yourself with the richest and most powerful? Look, I mean, guys, I'm just throwing it out there because it worked. Like it worked, right? So, I mean, anyways, that's really an overview of his life, because after that, through all of his work, we then know that he dies in Argos, like I mentioned at the start of this. And he does have a family. He ends up having a wife and 3 children throughout his life, and he dies peacefully in his old age. Now, I did briefly mention that he has an incredible reputation, to the point where Alexander the Great doesn't want to burn his house. Okay, so let's just come back to that for a hot second, because this is obviously years and years and years later. Alexander the Great goes to invade a bunch of places in like everywhere. Where doesn't Alexander the Great invade? And when he goes to invade Thebes, he razes the whole thing to the ground, right? He just completely destroys Thebes. Again, I talked to Professor Paul Cartledge in more detail about this episode. But what's most interesting is that when they are in Thebes, one of the only things that Alexander the Great tells his men that they are not allowed to destroy is Pindar's home. And that is left. That survives. So let's talk a little bit more about these odes. Obviously not in too much detail, or else I have absolutely nothing to say in the following videos when I want to start getting into them. We don't have all of Pindar's odes that survive to us today, obviously. What is probably the most important point that I should mention to you guys is that he is very difficult to read. Now, I do want to let you guys know that we need to stop in the comments being like, actually, I found this really easy. And like, how could she say that this was difficult? All this kind of stuff. It's amazing if you guys are watching this video and you've translated these works and you found them a piece of cake, or you worked really hard at them to the point where now you can translate them. But let's not make other people feel bad because inherently a lot of this stuff is tricky, and you do really have to be trained in order to translate these things. Learning another language, let alone a dead language, or a dead variation of the language, is incredibly difficult and is something that people should be proud of, but we should not at any point make it sound like this is a very easy thing to do, just in case there are people watching who want to learn and then read your comment and then feel bad that they've struggled with it. And when it comes to Pindar, scholars have mentioned how tricky he is, right? This is a thing. I personally have never tried to translate Pindar. I never had to. I was oftentimes told by my friends who were doing it, don't do it. This is too difficult. Pindar has a really unique style, and lots of scholars have pointed to this and said, yeah, it's possible to translate him. Like, he's not untranslatable, but he is certainly not an easy feat. Along with him being incredibly difficult to translate, as I mentioned as well, we do see a lot of his own thoughts and his own opinions, his own values and views coming through in a lot of these odes that we do have and that we can read. A number of these things are his views of classes, for example, like I said, religion, so we do get these wonderful little moments of picking apart Pindar's view of the ancient Greek world. His views of class are honestly quite interesting. He speaks a lot about how he thinks that the strongest and the most powerful, sort of quote unquote, of society should use their position to uphold others. And more specifically, that nobility, and when you're born into the nobility, should come with kind of a sense of, matching nobility with others. I don't know if I explained that really well, but basically when you were born to a particular standard, what comes through in Pindar's writing is that he believes that those people should have a certain level of conduct at the same time. Like, there should be these really high standards. If you were born richer, if you're born in a better position, you should have more standards than people who are born into lower classes. Your job should be to uphold certain people, to uphold certain values, to do these sorts of things because other people can't, but you have the freedom to do that. Did I make that make a little bit more sense? Essentially, if you were privileged, it was your job to protect the unprivileged. And so therefore you should have more expectation placed upon you. I think that was better. Yeah, that was that was 10 times better. Now, remember how I mentioned that he had aligned himself with tyrants? It had basically made him, come back onto the scene. People were sort of not forgetting, but kind of allowing him to come back after being pro-Persian. His poetry after that point, even though he was accused of being a sellout, even though he was accused of changing, even though he was accused of, a million things under the sun, then actually what we see, and the reason why I said before, it worked, is because we don't actually see a change in his values in his writing, right? So when we actually read through the poetry that comes from before this and after this, we really do see the same man that held the same set of values. And to me and to a lot of other scholars, it really seems like he was using the system to gain back a reputation so that he could continue writing what he wanted to write about, which was in essence what I was saying before. So we do have this consistent image of Pindar coming through in his writing, which is utterly fascinating. So if you guys do want to read his poetry, as I always say, I've linked as many free options in the description below, so check that out. And what's interesting is to compare and contrast all those years before and after, and to see how those values seem to still be seeped within his poetry and do not change, despite him using different angles in order to get attention and work. So when it comes to the actual works, what are you guys going to be finding when you click on the links in the description below? As I said, not everything survives to us today. And in fact, a lot of these, the Pindar choral odes, were kept, as many things, in the Library of Alexandria. And these, we do know, were separated into like it feels like a million different categories, because he wrote so many different the same type of poet, which is lyric poetry, but he wrote so many different sort of subcategories of that they were really well organized. So, I did make a note of this, that they were split up by these librarians in Alexandria into hymns. We had dithyrambs. We had 2 books on professional songs specifically, 3 books on maiden songs, 2 books specifically dedicated to dance songs, more books on praise. They just, honestly, I'm looking at this list. It would be a shorter list if we tried to figure out what he didn't write about. Like, there are so many different variations of his poetry that were all kept very, very safe. And unfortunately, the only ones that survive to us today are 44 choral victory odes from the Pan-Hellenic Games specifically, right? Now, these have been said even in ancient times they've been upheld as his masterpieces, and those are the ones that we can read today. But the majority of his work are lost, and we do have little parts of them in fragments, which is great. So we can sort of know a little bit of what was going on, but for the most part, the rest of it didn't make it down to the 21st century. The odes, or as I've also been saying throughout this video, songs, they frequently contain allusions to the history, religion, mythology, all of that kind of stuff at the time as well, along with, as I was saying, the standards of society. Pindar uses a lot of myths and heroes associated with a specific victor's city in order to sort of compare and contrast them and to write these much deeper, much more grandiose poems, shall we say. But since most of his works are lost, unfortunately, and the note that I'm going to end on for this video is that modern historians, it becomes incredibly difficult for us to place him among his contemporaries and to kind of figure out where exactly he was within that world when it came to his status and when it came to his fame. But despite that, his odes are such a gift to us because they give us this beautiful insight into the culture, the social, the political ideas of this era, and specifically the lives of the aristocrats, not only from his perspective as being one of them, but also from the perspective of the people who hired him and who paid him and who upheld these poems that he wrote. They give us a really nice window into their ideals and their expectations. So in saying that, this has been an incredibly long video about Pindar. I have missed out so much detail, I'm aware of that, But if there is any more detail that I have missed out that you guys think, oh gosh, somebody should know this, you can always leave a comment. I always encourage that, so that way people can go down there and they can find some other really fun facts about Pindar. Linked in the description below are not only his odes, which you guys can find for free online. I always think it's really important to do that. But also you guys can find links to bound works of his incredible poems. And of course, as we work through the odes, as we work through these pieces of writing that he's left to us, I will also be adding in anything that I think is necessarily important that I haven't put into this video. So do not be worried. All of the information will be coming at you in some way, shape, and form, because the whole purpose of this is to hopefully leave you being more of a nerd than when I found you. But with all that being said, it has been a pleasure to have you joining me today to discuss Pindar, and I hope you learned something new about an author maybe you didn't know before. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on MoAn Inc. I'll see you guys then.